The cold of the throne was a familiar thing, a seep of ancient stone that had long ago become an extension of the king's own rigid stillness. King Draven of the Vesperine court did not move. He did not breathe, for he had no need of it. He simply was, a figure carved from marble and shadow, his eyes the color of twilight blood, fixed on the heavy oak doors of the chamber. His face was a study in immortal beauty turned cruel. Sharp cheekbones that could cut glass, a mouth that had forgotten how to smile, and skin so pale it seemed to drink the light from the room. His hair, black as a starless sky, fell past his shoulders in a straight, heavy curtain. He was a vision of terrible, unapproachable perfection. Outside, the first winter snows of the century were beginning to fall, each flake a silent, damning judgment. They had been falling for 3 days, ever since the child was born. He had not seen the child. He would not. The doors opened. Seraphine entered. She was not the radiant creature of sunlight and laughter he had stolen from the mortal world. Grief had chiseled her into something sharp and fragile, her face pale as the snow. Her honey-brown eyes, those warm eyes that had once held galaxies of adoration for him, were now cold, dead stars. Her golden hair hung limp and uncombed around her shoulders. Dark circles shadowed her eyes. Her body still carried the evidence of childbirth, a weariness that made something twist in his gut. In her arms, wrapped in a thick woolen blanket, was the bundle, the reason for this unending winter in his soul. It was a boy, the maesters had told him, a son, his heir, and he was an abomination. "You summoned me, my king." Seraphine's voice was a shard of ice. The title was a mockery. She had not called him by his name since the birth. Draven's gaze did not waver from the wall above her head. To look at her was to see his failure. To look at the bundle was to give it a reality he could not afford. "The arrangements have been made. A carriage will take you to the Eastern Territories. A cottage has been prepared in the Whisperwood. You will be provided for." The silence that followed was louder than any scream. "You are banishing us," she stated. "The child cannot remain at court," he said, his voice a low, toneless rasp. "It is insufficient." Insufficient. The word was a coward's shield. The maester's reports had been clinical, brutal. The boy's heart beat too fast, a frantic, mortal drumming. His blood was thin. He was warm. He cried. He was fragile. He was half-human. A mongrel. A weakness that would shatter a dynasty built on 10,000 years of purity. His enemies would smell the weakness like blood in the water. Lord Valerius's words from their wedding night echoed mockingly. "A human bride may bear you a child of mixed blood, my king. The outcome is unpredictable. Our bloodline has never been diluted thus." Draven had dismissed him then with supreme arrogance. "My blood is ancient and strong. It will dominate any union." He had been so certain, so blindly, stupidly certain. And when the maesters had come in the 7th month with their concerns, he had dismissed them too. And now that arrogance had produced this. He had gambled, and he had lost. But it was not he who would pay the price. "His name is Lucian," Seraphine whispered. "Draven, please. Look at him. Just look at him. He is your son." "He is a mistake." Draven's voice was granite. "My line requires strength. It requires permanence. That thing offers only vulnerability. It is a death sentence for us all." "He is not a thing," she said, her voice gaining steel. "He is a boy, and he is more your son than you will ever know. He has your eyes." A sharp pain lanced through him. He had refused to see the child's face, but to hear it carried his most defining feature. "The carriage is waiting," he said, turning his back on her, a final, unpardonable act of dismissal. He stared out at the swirling snow. He heard her sharp intake of breath, then a sob. Not delicate weeping, but a raw, guttural sound of devastation. "You swore to me," she choked out. "You swore on your very existence that you would protect me, cherish me, love any child of our union. You stood in the moonlight garden and you swore, Draven." Her words were daggers. He remained rigid, but his hands clenched into fists. I gave up everything for you, she continued. My family, my world, the sun. I can never see the sun again because of you. I walked into your darkness willingly because I loved you. I trusted you. And the first moment your love is tested, you throw us away like garbage. The bundle began to cry. Do you hear that? That is your son. Do you know what the birth was like, Draven? I screamed for you, for hours. I begged the maesters to bring you. And you sent word that you were occupied with matters of state. He had. He remembered hiding in this very room, unable to face what was coming. I almost died bringing him into this world, she said. Your son almost killed me being born. And I would have forgiven that. But I cannot forgive this. I cannot forgive you. Then her voice changed, became sharper. You knew, she said. Don't you dare pretend you didn't know this could happen. Valerius warned you at our wedding. I heard him. He told you that a vampire-human union might produce a child of mixed blood. And do you remember what you said? His silence was answer enough. You said you didn't care, her voice cracked. You said any child of our love would be perfect, that you would cherish them regardless. You dismissed his concerns. You promised me it didn't matter. The memory crashed over him. He had said that. He had meant it in that moment. And when I was pregnant, the maesters came to you with concerns. They told you the heartbeat was wrong, that the child might be more human than vampire, and you dismissed them too. Every word was true. Every word was a condemnation. So don't you dare stand there and act like this is some unexpected tragedy. You knew this could happen. You were warned, and you chose to marry me anyway. You chose to have a child with me anyway. And now that the consequences of your choices have arrived, you're punishing him for it. You're punishing an innocent baby for the outcome you were explicitly told was possible. The truth was devastating. He had known. He had been warned by his council, by his maesters. And in his arrogance, he had ignored every warning. He had gambled. And when it failed, he was making his wife and child pay. Look at him, she demanded. Look at him, you coward. You chose to create him. You chose to risk this. The least you can do is look at what your arrogance has wrought. His hands were shaking. If he looked, the wall would crumble. He would break. And he could not break. He was the king. The carriage is waiting, he repeated, hollow. The silence that followed was the silence of something dying. When she spoke again, her voice was quiet, emotionless, worse than screaming. I hope your throne keeps you warm at night, my king. I hope your precious bloodline purity fills the empty rooms of this palace. I hope your kingdom loves you the way I did, because you will never be loved like that again. He heard her footsteps. She stopped at the door, looking back. His name is Lucian. Lucian Draven Vesper. Your son. Your heir. The prince you are too blind to see. The child you chose to risk creating. And one day, Draven, you will regret this more than anything you have ever done in your 500 years. I promise you that. The great doors closed with an echoing boom. He stood there, half-turned. He had done what was necessary. He had saved his kingdom. He was Draven, the unyielding, the eternal king. But the voice in his head would not be silenced. You knew. You were warned. This is your fault. And for the first time in 500 years, a tear traced down his face. He let it freeze there, a monument to the day he had chosen power over love. The throne felt colder than ever. He walked to it and sat, gripping the armrests until the stone cracked. And then he bent forward and buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. He had been warned. He had known. And he had chosen this path anyway. The guilt was not just for what he had done, but for what he had known he was risking. 5 years passed like a glacier, each day indistinguishable from the last. Draven ruled with an iron fist and an empty soul. He fortified borders, crushed dissent, negotiated treaties with chilling precision. His court was orderly, his kingdom secure. He was, by every metric, a successful monarch. He was also a ghost haunting his own life. The palace, once filled with Seraphine's music and light, was now a mausoleum. Draven walked its corridors alone, phantom scents of sunlight and honey sometimes catching at his senses. He had ordered her rooms sealed, but he could not seal the space she had carved in his being. He never spoke her name, never allowed it spoken in his presence. She and the child were a secret shame. To the world, his human consort had simply faded. The child, he told his council, had perished with her. It was a neat lie that preserved the throne's dignity. But at night, the lie would unravel. He would stand before the sealed door to her rooms, hand raised, fingers tracing the cold wood. He would remember her warmth, her sleeping breath, the way she had looked at him as if he were the dawn. Then he would remember the look in her eyes as she left. Some nights, he would slide down to sit with his back against that door. "I was wrong," he would whisper to the silence. "God help me, I was wrong." But there was no one to hear. He had made his choice, and he would live with it for eternity. And the worst part was that he couldn't even claim ignorance. He had been warned. By Valerius, by the maesters. He had dismissed them all in his arrogance. The thought of eternity, once a comfort, now stretched before him like a prison sentence. There were nights when he would stand on the highest battlement, wondering if even an immortal could die from such a fall. He never jumped. Cowardice. Or perhaps the faint hope that someday he might see them again. He thought of the child even less, for that way lay madness. The boy was an abstract threat, neutralized. He had built a wall around that memory, stone by stone. Yet sometimes a crack would appear. He would see a child playing in the courtyard, and a hollow ache would echo through him. He would wonder if Lucian looked like that, if he laughed like that, if he was happy. He had spies. The reports came monthly. The woman and child are well. No incidents to report. He never asked for more detail. He simply needed to know they still drew breath. It was the only mercy he allowed himself, and it cut him deeper each time. His council had praised his decision initially. "A necessary sacrifice, my king," Lord Valerius had said. Valerius never reminded him of his warning, never said, "I told you so." But sometimes Draven would catch him looking with something that might have been pity. Now they pressed him to take a new consort, to produce a true heir. He refused coldly. The thought of another woman in Seraphine's place was repulsive. He would rule for another 1,000 years, he told them. There was time. But it was a lie. He was waiting. An eternal, pointless vigil. One evening, during a tedious council meeting, a scout requested urgent audience. The man was breathless, pale. "My king, there are strange occurrences in the Whisperwood, on the eastern border." Draven went utterly still. The room dropped 10 degrees. The Whisperwood. He had not heard the name spoken aloud in 5 years. "Be specific," he commanded, voice dangerously soft. "Lights, my king. Strange, shimmering lights in the deep woods, golden and silver. The animals are different. The wolves sing instead of howl. The deer show no fear. The forest itself seems alive. The mortals speak of a guardian, a spirit who heals the sick and protects the lost. They leave offerings at the forest edge." Draven's mind raced. A rogue sorcerer? A fey creature? He had banished Seraphine there precisely because nothing ever happened. And the woman? The one who lives in the woodcutter's cottage? The council exchanged glances. They had believed the woman and child dead. The scout hesitated. "She is well, my king. The villagers call her the sun-touched, and she has a son." The air grew thin, heavy. The council sat in stunned silence. Valerius's face went carefully blank. "A son," Draven repeated. He pictured a pale, sickly human boy. But the lights, the singing wolves, the forest alive. That was not nothing. "The boy, describe him." I have not seen him personally, my king, but the villagers say he has dark hair and strange eyes. Eyes that glow when he uses his magic. Magic. Half-human children were not supposed to have magic. That had been the basis of his certainty. What magic? Draven's voice was barely a whisper. Healing, my king. A farmer's daughter was dying of fever. The boy touched her and she recovered within hours. A hunter's broken leg mended in minutes. The lights appear when the boy is near. The villagers say he is blessed. A miracle. The room was utterly silent. A half-vampire child with healing magic. Power over nature itself. Impossible. Unprecedented. Breathtaking. Send the royal guard to investigate, he ordered. Discreetly. Observe only. The woman and child are not to be disturbed. Is that clear? The scout fled. Valerius cleared his throat. My king, I was not aware the woman and her offspring still lived. Is it relevant, Valerius? Draven's voice was ice. If the child possesses power born of an impure bloodline, it sets a dangerous precedent. If our enemies learn that a half-breed bastard of the Vesperine line wields magic, choose your next words very carefully, Draven interrupted. The temperature plummeted. Frost formed on the wine decanters. That child is not a bastard. He is my son. He is a prince of this realm, whether you acknowledge it or not. And you will speak of him with respect, or you will not speak at all. The council sat in stunned silence. Valerius bowed his head. Of course, my king. Forgive my imprecise language. But then he made a fatal miscalculation. However, perhaps it is time to address this situation more permanently. The woman and child remain a vulnerability, a loose end. If I may be so bold, a quiet resolution would serve the kingdom's interests. An accident, perhaps. He didn't finish. Draven moved with impossible speed. One moment on his throne, the next he had Valerius by the throat, slammed against the wall hard enough to crack the masonry. The other council members leapt up, but none dared intervene. Draven's face was inches from Valerius's, and the old vampire saw something that made his ancient heart clench in primal fear. Not just rage. Anguish. 5 years of suppressed guilt and longing given form. If you ever suggest harm to my family again, I will personally ensure you spend the rest of your immortal existence wishing you could die. I will have you sealed in stone and buried so deep the world will forget you ever existed. Do I make myself absolutely clear? Valerius managed a jerky nod. Draven released him. The elder crumpled to the floor. Draven turned to the rest of his council. Let me be perfectly clear. The woman is Seraphine Vesper. She was my mate. She is the mother of my son. And I wronged her in a way that can never be fully atoned for. The child, Lucian, is my heir, my only heir. And if this council, if this kingdom cannot accept that truth, you are all free to leave. I will rule alone if I must. One by one, the council members bowed their heads. Not in agreement, but in fear, and recognition that their king had just revealed a weakness. He still loved the woman he had cast aside. You are all dismissed. Leave me. They fled. Draven stood alone, hands shaking, control in tatters. For 5 years he had told himself he'd made the right choice. For 5 years he had built walls around the guilt. And in one evening, those walls had crumbled to dust. He walked to the tall windows overlooking the eastern territories. Somewhere out there was a small cottage, and in it was the woman he had loved more than his own existence. And a boy. A 5-year-old boy with dark hair and magic. A boy who healed the sick and made wolves sing. His son. He pressed his forehead against the cold glass. What have I done? He whispered. He had thrown away a miracle because he was afraid it wasn't pure enough. He had cast aside his own child because of pride and fear and arrogance. Because he had been warned and had ignored every warning, and now he had to live with that knowledge for eternity. The report from the Royal Guard arrived 3 days later. The boy indeed had unusual abilities. He could coax plants to grow with a touch. Injured animals sought him out. The light that emanated from him was warm, golden, nothing like vampire sorcery. Magic born of life itself. Breathtaking. The report included a sketch. The boy was small, thin, with wild dark hair. Shown kneeling beside a deer, his face turned slightly away. The artist had noted, "Could not capture his eyes accurately. They change color in the light." Dark hair, strange eyes. Draven's eyes. He has your eyes. He folded the report and locked it away. Then he sat in darkness and allowed himself, for the first time in 5 years, to truly think about what he had lost. Not in abstract terms, but as a father. He had a son named Lucian, 5 years old, loved by villagers, safe, happy perhaps. And he had no idea his father existed. Or believed his father had abandoned him, which was the truth. Draven put his head in his hands and wept. Deep, wrenching sobs. He wept for the 5 years he had missed, the first smile, the first word, the first steps. He wept for Seraphine, who had endured childbirth and exile and 5 years alone because of his cowardice. He wept for the man he had been, so certain, so blind. And he wept because he knew he had destroyed something irreplaceable. And no amount of power, no length of eternity would ever make it right. He had been warned. He had known. And he had chosen this path anyway. The ambush came 2 weeks later. It was a masterpiece of silent violence on the Old King's Road, a mountain pass between the Heartlands and the Northern Territories. Draven was returning from a tense parley with the Vrikolakos Alpha. The meeting had ended in stalemate. The Vrikolakos smelled weakness. Word had spread that the Vesperine king was distracted. They weren't wrong. He rode with only his elite guard, the Crimson Blades, a display of confidence meant to project strength. A miscalculation born of his distracted state. His mind had not been on negotiations. It had been on a forest, and a boy he would never know. The attack began with the air growing heavy, thick with wolfsbane and something metallic. The wind died, night insects ceased. Unnatural silence descended. Draven reined in his warhorse. His senses screamed. He could taste poison on the air, feel hostile intent from the shadows above. "Ambush," he said, voice low but carrying to every guard. The Crimson Blades formed a defensive circle. The world exploded in motion. Figures in black dropped from cliffs, silent as falling leaves. Assassins. Their weapons gleamed with a sickly silver sheen. Not pure silver, but an ancient alloy forged with spells of decay. The Crimson Blades met the charge. The first clash was shockingly muted, the silvered swords drinking sound. A blade went down with a choked gasp, black ichor spreading. The enchanted metal dissolved him. He crumbled to ash. Draven was off his horse instantly, his ancestral blade Nyx in hand. He was a whirlwind of death, moving through assassins like a phantom. He severed heads, pierced hearts, moved with centuries of skill. But for every one he cut down, 2 more materialized. They were not trying to kill him. They were hurting him, forcing him back, creating an opening. For what? The answer came in a crossbow bolt, thick as a man's thumb, from the road ahead. Not aimed at his heart or head, at his shoulder. He moved to deflect it, easy. But as he did, a second bolt from a different angle struck his thigh. The coordination was perfect, inhuman. Pain, white-hot and absolute, erupted through him. Not the clean pain of a wound, this was fire, poison, agony. The bolt was carved from petrified rowan wood, anathema to his kind, the tip coated with glowing venom. He could feel it entering his bloodstream, a tide of liquid agony attacking the very essence of his vampiric nature. The eternal cold that was his core began to burn. Strength turned to water. The world swam at the edges. His immortal senses muffled, confused. He staggered, snarling. He ripped the bolt from his leg, black blood spraying. But the damage was done. The poison mimicked mortality. He felt terrifying weakness, the frailty he had long disdained. His immortal healing sputtered like a dying flame. His guard was being decimated. The silvered blades and sheer numbers were overwhelming. Another blade fell, then another, crumbling to dust. They were dying for him, for his arrogance, for his distraction. "My king, retreat!" one shouted. But there was nowhere to retreat. With a roar of fury and desperation, Draven surged forward, no longer the untouchable king, but a cornered beast. He fought with savagery, cleared space around him. But more kept coming, relentless, tireless, letting the poison work. His vision tunneled. Sounds grew distant, muffled. His limbs felt like lead. Each movement was monumental effort. His legs buckled. He fell to one knee, nicks clattering against cobblestones. He tried to rise, to summon ancestral power, but his body refused. The burning cold spread from his leg, up his torso, reaching for his heart, freezing and immolating simultaneously. The assassins paused, forming a circle around him, waiting, watching him die. Draven's head fell forward, black hair curtaining his face. He could taste defeat, bitter and unfamiliar. He was Draven. He was king. He had ruled for 500 years. He did not die on his knees on a forgotten road. But the poison disagreed. It pulled him down into suffocating darkness, a final twilight. His thoughts fragmented. He saw Seraphine's face, not broken and bitter, but as she had been early on, laughing, eyes full of light. He saw the bundle in her arms, the child he had refused to look at. Lucian. He would die without ever seeing his son's face. The regret was a physical weight, crushing his last strength. He deserved this. He deserved to die alone and in agony for what he had done, for knowing better and choosing worse, for gambling with lives and refusing to pay the price. His vision went black. The world dissolved. His last thought before darkness took him, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." The darkness was filled with fire and ice, with Seraphine's eyes, with the phantom sound of a baby's cry. He drifted in non-being, aware only of poison's relentless march. It was dissolving him cell by cell, unraveling the immortal thread, his eternity unraveling into final, agonizing moments. This was death. After all these centuries, death had found him. And he welcomed it, because in death, perhaps, there would be peace, an end to the guilt, perhaps. Then, through the haze, a new sensation, a scent. Not blood or poison or cold stone, but something clean and alive. Pine needles, damp earth, rain on leaves, crushed moss. The scent of the whisperwood. Impossible. The whisperwood was hundreds of miles away. He was hallucinating, the poison creating phantoms in his dying mind. A pressure, a touch, on his hand, impossibly small, impossibly warm. The warmth did not recoil from his deathly cold skin, from the black ichor staining his fingers. It pushed against it, a tiny sun fighting back the endless night. He fought to open his eyes, the effort monumental, like lifting tombstones. His eyelids were lead, every muscle screamed, but some primal part of him needed to see, needed to know what was touching him with such fearless warmth in his final moments. The world swam into blurry, distorted focus. He was lying on cold cobblestones. Bodies of guards and assassins littered the ground, a silent tableau of his failure. 6 crimson blades dead, the rest gone. But the living assassins were gone too, vanished, as if something had driven them away. And someone was kneeling beside him. A child. A small boy no more than 5, with a wild mane of night-dark hair falling into his eyes. Dressed in simple homespun clothes, rough tunic and breeches mended many times. Bare feet smudged with dirt and grass. Small, far too small to be alone on this dangerous road, too small to be unafraid in the presence of death. But he was not afraid. He looked down at Draven with intense, solemn concentration. his small face scrunched with effort, bottom lip caught between his teeth. Draven's poison-addled mind struggled. A child, here, in the middle of carnage. Impossible. Was this death? A hallucination? A vision of the son he would never know, come to ease his passage? The boy's small hand rested on Draven's, and from that contact a gentle pulsing light emanated, a soft silvery gold glow, the color of dawn on a misty morning, the color of hope. And the warmth spread from the boy's hand into his, a current of pure, clean energy, meeting the poison head-on and pushing it back, inch by agonizing inch. Draven could feel it. The burning ice receded. The agonizing fire was soothed, not extinguished, but tempered, replaced by gentle, flowing warmth that felt like sunlight, like the first breath of spring after endless winter. It was magic. But no magic he had ever encountered in 5 centuries, not the structured power of human sorcery, not the chaotic energy of the Fae. It felt familiar and alien at once, like a song his blood remembered from some distant time, in a language it had never learned. It felt like life itself, distilled into pure, radiant energy. He watched, mesmerized despite his agony, as the boy lifted his other hand and placed it over the festering wound on his thigh. The golden light intensified, brightening until almost painful to look at. The boy's brow furrowed deeper, and he let out a small grunt of effort, a child's sound, pure and unguarded. Beneath his hand, the blackened, corroded flesh began to stitch itself together. The dark venom was drawn out, pulled by invisible force, dissipating into air like smoke touched by sunlight. The mortal frailty receded, slowly, grudgingly. The ancient, slumbering power of Draven's blood began to stir, to awaken, to heal. Who was this child? This impossible, miraculous child who wielded life magic with the ease of breathing, who had somehow appeared in the middle of massacre and chosen to save a dying stranger? Draven forced his head to turn, the movement sending fresh pain through his body. But he needed to see, needed to understand. His gaze searched the shadows at the road's edge, and he saw her. Seraphine. She stood half hidden by a gnarled oak, bow in one hand, arrow nocked but not drawn. Even from this distance he could see her hands shaking. She was no longer the broken creature who had left his throne room. 5 years in the Whisperwood had forged her into something different. There was strength in her stance, coiled readiness in how she held herself. She was thinner, harder, golden hair pulled back in a severe braid. She wore practical woodswoman clothes, leather and wool, muted greens and browns. But beneath the hardness, he could see the terror in her eyes, the desperate hope. She was watching the boy as he knelt beside the man who had destroyed their lives. Her face was a war of emotions, fear, fury, anguish, and beneath it all, a love so fierce it could move mountains. Their eyes met across the road. Draven saw her flinch, saw her hand tighten on the bow. For a moment, he thought she might shoot him. He almost wished she would. But she didn't. She simply stood there, frozen, watching, waiting. His gaze snapped back to the child. The boy, feeling his father's attention, looked up from his work, and for the first time, Draven saw his face clearly, truly. The face was a perfect, devastating fusion. The delicate line of his jaw was Seraphine's, soft and fine-boned. The stubborn set of his chin, the slight tilt of his head, the way his brow furrowed in concentration, that was his own. The boy had his mother's nose, small and straight, and the shape of his mouth was hers too, soft and expressive. But the eyes, dear God, the eyes. The boy had his eyes. But not the twilight blood red of a full vampire, not the predatory crimson. These were something new, something unprecedented, something that should not exist but did. They were the color of amethysts held up to light, a deep, luminous violet, rich and multifaceted. And shot through that violet, like veins of precious metal, were flecks of pure gold that seemed to glow with inner light. They were the eyes of a king, ancient and knowing, filled with a gravity that should not exist in such a young face. Yet they held the unmistakable warmth and light of a human soul, uncorrupted, pure. They were the eyes she had described 5 years ago, the eyes he had refused to see, the eyes he had condemned without ever witnessing. They were beautiful. They were impossible. They were his. Recognition slammed into Draven with the force of a physical blow, a battering ram to the chest. It was not a thought, not a deduction. It was a cataclysm. An instantaneous, fundamental truth that shattered the universe and rebuilt it in a heartbeat. This was his son. The weakling, the abomination, the mistake, the insufficiency, the death sentence for his dynasty. This small, fierce, impossibly powerful being who was currently pouring life back into him with a magic no pure-blood vampire had ever dreamed of possessing. A hybrid power, a fusion of sun and shadow, of mortal life and eternal night, of warmth and cold. The very thing he had condemned as a fatal flaw was a strength beyond his comprehension, a power that was, at this very moment, saving his miserable, unworthy life. And he had known. He had been warned. Valerius had told him this could happen. The maesters had cautioned him. And he had dismissed them all in his arrogance, convinced his will could override nature itself. And when nature proved him wrong, when his gamble failed, he had punished the innocent result of his own hubris. The wall in his mind did not crack. It exploded, vaporized into dust and ash, obliterated in an instant. 5 years of denial, of cold certainty, of carefully constructed justifications came crashing down in a soul-crushing avalanche. He saw it all in terrible, crystal-clear understanding. The tiny bundle he had refused to look at, the terror and betrayal in her eyes, the echoing slam of the throne room doors. 5 years of hollow victory. The sealed rooms and phantom scents and nights spent weeping alone. And beneath it all, the knowledge that he had been warned, that he had chosen this path with open eyes, and had lacked the courage to accept the consequences. The face he had refused to see now burned behind his eyes, seared into his consciousness with the permanence of a brand. He could never unsee it. He could never unknow this truth. His son who should have hated him, who had every right to leave him here to die. But he hadn't. He had knelt beside a dying stranger and poured his own life force into healing him, because it was the right thing to do. Because this small, 5-year-old child possessed a goodness his father had never known. The carefully constructed mask of the unyielding king cracked, splintered, and fell away into nothing. It shattered like glass, like ice, like every fragile, false thing. Underneath was not a king, not a predator, not an immortal lord. Underneath was just a man, stripped bare and bleeding, staring at the magnitude of his own monstrous, unforgivable error. The strength was returning to his limbs, the poison now a dull, fading ache. But a far greater agony was taking its place. The weight of 5 lost years. The knowledge of what he had thrown away. The sight of his son's face, finally, and the understanding that he had missed everything. The first smile, the first laugh, the first word, the first step. Every moment of this child's life forfeited through his own blind, stubborn pride, through his arrogance, through his refusal to accept that he had been wrong. He pushed himself up onto his elbows, body still aching but responding now. His gaze was locked on the boy's face, on his son's face, on Lucian's face. Lucian, her voice from the past echoed. His name is Lucian. Lucian Draven Vesper. Your son. The boy, Lucian, tilted his head, violet gold eyes wide with a child's simple, uncomplicated curiosity, unburdened by the crushing weight of history crashing down around them. He didn't know who this man was. He didn't know this dying stranger was his father. He had simply seen someone in need and acted, because that was what his mother taught him, because kindness was natural to him, because he had a good heart. A choked sound, half sob, half gasp, escaped Draven's lips. His control, the bedrock of his existence for 500 years, was gone, evaporated like morning mist. He was adrift in an ocean of regret so vast and deep it threatened to drown him. He looked from his son's face to Seraphine, who watched from the trees, expression unreadable behind a mask of guarded pain. She had known what their son was, what he could become, and he had not listened. He had not even looked. He had been too much of a coward to face the consequences of his own choices. He lowered his gaze back to the boy. Lucian was looking at him with mild concern now, small hand still resting on Draven's arm, the healing light dimming but not gone. "Are you better now?" the boy asked, his voice small and clear, with the slight lisp of a child who had only recently mastered speech. The voice of innocence, of trust. The words were a knife to the heart. "Are you better now?" As if Draven could ever be better, as if anything could ever be right again. But the boy was asking about the physical wound, not the gaping chasm in Draven's soul. "Yes," Draven whispered, voice raw and broken. "Yes, You saved me." Lucian smiled then, a small, shy smile of pure pride. "Mama says it's important to help people who are hurt." Mama, Seraphine. Of course she had taught him that. Of course she had raised him to be kind, to be good, despite everything Draven had done to her. The words that came next tore themselves from the deepest, most broken part of Draven's soul. They were not meant for Seraphine or for the boy. They were a confession to the uncaring sky, to the ghosts of his ancestors, to the gods he did not believe in, to himself. What have I done? The question hung in the sudden, profound silence of the mountain pass. Not a question seeking an answer, but a verdict. A final, damning judgment on a king who had gained his kingdom and lost his soul, who had been warned and had ignored every warning, who had gambled with lives and refused to pay the price. And in that moment, something fundamental within Draven broke beyond all repair. The ancient, rigid pride, the fear of weakness, the cold calculus of power, the obsession with purity and bloodlines. It all shattered like glass under a hammer. Not a slow erosion, an instantaneous destruction, a complete and total collapse of everything he had built his identity upon. And in the ruins of the king, something new began to stir. Born in an agony of regret and a terrifying, desperate surge of love he had denied himself for 5 years. A father. He stared at his son, truly seeing him for the first time, and knew that his eternity had just begun again. But this time, he would not, could not, get it wrong. This time, he would do whatever it took. Sacrifice whatever was necessary. Crawl through broken glass and burning coals if that was what was required. He would earn the right to be in this child's life, even if it took the rest of his immortal existence. Even if Seraphine never forgave him. Even if Lucian never called him father. He would try. God help him, he would try. The transformation was not a slow dawning. It was a tectonic upheaval, a violent and immediate reordering of his entire being. The man who struggled to his feet was not the same one who had fallen. The king who had ruled through fear and icy distance died on that blood-soaked road. And in his place stood a father, raw and exposed and trembling with the weight of his own inadequacy. His only thought to close the 5-year, self-inflicted chasm between himself and the family he had forsaken. He took a step toward the boy, then another, body still aching but pain irrelevant now. Seraphine tensed in the shadows, hand tightening on her bow, body instinctively moving to shield Lucian. She stepped forward, out of the concealment of the tree, placing herself between Draven and their son. Her face was a mask of fierce, protective fury. "Don't," she said, voice low and dangerous. "Don't you dare come near him." The words stopped him as effectively as a blade through the heart. Lucian, however, simply watched Draven with those impossibly wise, violet eyes, his expression curious rather than afraid. Draven stopped. He did not command. He did not demand. He did not summon the authority of his crown or his centuries of power. Instead, he did something he had not done in 1,000 years. He held up his hands, palms open in a gesture of complete surrender. It was the most difficult thing he had ever done, harder than any battle, any political maneuvering, any act of ruling. It was the relinquishment of control, the acknowledgement of his own powerlessness. "Seraphine," he said, voice rough and broken, each syllable scraping against his throat like shards of glass. Using her name was like unlocking a rusted gate sealed for years. The sound of it on his lips felt both foreign and achingly familiar. He faltered, the words dying. What could he say? What words existed that could bridge this chasm? "I'm sorry" was a pebble thrown against a mountain of sin. It was insulting in its inadequacy. "I was wrong" was a pathetic understatement that failed to capture even a fraction of the depth of his error. There were no words for the scope of his failure, no apology grand enough, no plea eloquent enough. So he didn't use them. He let the truth of his devastation show on his face, stripping away the last vestiges of royal pride, of vampiric superiority, of everything he had hidden behind for 5 centuries. He let her see the regret eating him alive, the shame that was a physical weight crushing his chest, the desperate, aching love that was flooding the empty spaces inside him like a dam bursting. He looked at Lucian, his son, and the look was one of pure, unadulterated awe, mixed with a self-loathing so profound it bordered on madness. "I don't deserve to speak to you," he continued, voice barely above a whisper but carrying clearly. "I don't deserve to stand in your presence. I don't deserve to breathe the same air as this child. I know that. But I'm asking." His voice cracked. "I'm begging. Please, let me try to explain. Let me—" "Explain?" Seraphine's laugh was brittle and humorless, a sound like breaking glass. "You want to explain? 5 years, Draven. 5 years of silence. 5 years of raising our son alone in a forest, wondering if we'd survive the winter, if the wolves would come, if some disease would take him because I had no maesters, no healers, nothing but my own 2 hands and my will to keep him alive." Her voice was rising, 5 years of suppressed rage finally finding its outlet. "You want to explain why you looked at our newborn son and called him a thing? Why you couldn't even look at him? Why you sent us away like we were garbage?" Each word was a lash, and Draven accepted them without flinching, without defense. He deserved every one. "I screamed for you during the birth," she continued, voice shaking with emotion. Tears streamed down her face, but her eyes blazed with fury. "I screamed your name until my voice gave out, and you sent word that you were busy. Busy. Our son was being born, and you were busy." She took a step toward him, and he saw Lucian's small hand reach up to grip her tunic, concern on his young face. "Do you know what it's like to give birth alone? To have the maesters look at you with pity because your own mate won't come to your side? To push a child into the world and have no one to share that moment with because the man who swore to love you forever was too cowardly to face what he'd created?" Draven's eyes closed briefly, the image she painted searing itself into his mind. "I almost died," she said, voice dropping to a whisper. "The birth went wrong. There was so much blood. I heard the maesters saying I wouldn't make it, and all I could think was that I would die and you would never have to face us, that you would be relieved." "No," Draven breathed, the word torn from him. "No, Seraphine." "Yes," she hissed. "That's what I thought, that I was dying and you would be free of your mistake. But I didn't die. Out of spite maybe, or stubbornness, or maybe just because someone had to be there for him." She gestured to Lucian, hand shaking. Someone had to love him, since his father wouldn't. The words landed like blows, each one driving the knife deeper. "You want to explain?" Seraphine said again, voice steadying into something cold and hard. "Then explain. But first, explain this. You knew, didn't you? Don't pretend you didn't know this could happen. Valerius warned you at our wedding. I heard him. He told you that a vampire-human union might produce a child of mixed blood, that the outcome was unpredictable. And do you remember what you said?" His silence was answer enough. You said you didn't care, her voice cracked. You said any child of our love would be perfect, that you would cherish them regardless. You dismissed his concerns. You promised me it didn't matter, that our love was stronger than bloodline politics. The memory crashed over him. He had said that. In the garden, under the stars, with her hand in his. He had meant it in that moment, or thought he meant it. And when I was pregnant, the maesters came to you with concerns. I know they did. I heard them whispering outside my chambers. They told you the heartbeat was wrong, that the child might be more human than vampire. And you dismissed them, too. Every word was true. Every word was a condemnation.
So don't you dare, Seraphine said, voice shaking with emotion. Don't you dare stand there and act like this is some unexpected tragedy. You knew this could happen. You were warned. And you chose to marry me anyway. You chose to get me with child anyway. And now that the consequences of your choices have arrived, you're punishing him for it. You're punishing an innocent baby for the outcome you were explicitly told was possible. The truth of it was devastating, undeniable. He had known. He had been warned by his council, by his maesters, by the very laws of nature itself. And in his arrogance, in his certainty that his ancient blood would dominate, he had ignored every warning. He had gambled. And when the gamble failed, when reality refused to bend to his will, he was making his wife and child pay for his own hubris. Draven sank to his knees, bringing himself down to the boy's level. The movement sent fresh pain through his still healing body, but he ignored it. His entire focus was on his son. You're right, he said, voice breaking. You're absolutely right. I was warned. I knew. And I dismissed every warning in my arrogance. I convinced myself my blood was so powerful it would simply override your humanity. And when that certainty proved false, when reality had the audacity to contradict my expectations, I did what tyrants do. I lashed out at the innocent. He looked at Lucian, his voice softening. I made you both pay the price for my hubris, for my cowardice, for my refusal to accept that I could be wrong. He looked back up at Seraphine. I can't explain it in a way that makes it acceptable. There is no explanation that justifies what I did. I was afraid. I was proud. I was blind. I convinced myself that purity of blood was more important than, he gestured helplessly toward Lucian, than him, than you, than everything that actually mattered. I am so sorry, he said, tears streaming down his face unchecked. More than you could ever know. And I will spend the rest of my existence trying to atone for that betrayal. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Seraphine. I know I don't deserve it. But I'm asking you to let me know him, my son. Let me try to be something other than the monster who abandoned him. Lucian, who had been watching with wide eyes, suddenly spoke up. Mama, why is the man crying? Both adults looked at him, then Seraphine looked back at Draven. Tears were streaming down the king's face unchecked, cutting tracks through dirt and blood. He made no move to wipe them away. He simply stood there, broken and weeping, stripped of every defense. Because he's sad, little light, Seraphine said softly, her own voice thick with tears. Because sometimes grown-ups make terrible mistakes, and then they have to live with them. Is he sorry? Lucian asked, with a child's simple directness. Yes, Draven said, voice shaking. I am so sorry. Lucian studied him with those remarkable violet eyes. Mama says sorry is just a word. She says what matters is what you do after. The child's words struck Draven like a thunderbolt. This 5-year-old boy had just articulated the fundamental truth he needed to understand. Your mama is very wise, Draven said softly. And she's right. I can say sorry 1,000 times, and it won't change what I did. But if you'll let me, both of you, I want to show you. Every day, for the rest of my life. He looked up at Seraphine. Come home, both of you.
Come back to the citadel. Let me be the husband I should have been. Let me be the father he deserves." Seraphine was silent, her face a battlefield of warring emotions. "Why now?" she asked quietly. "Why did it take you nearly dying?" "Because I'm a coward," Draven said with devastating honesty. "Because I built walls around my guilt and told myself I'd made the right choice. Because I couldn't face what I'd done. And because I never saw him. I refused to look at him that day, and I've spent 5 years trying not to think about him. But now I've seen his face. Now I know what I lost, and I can't unknow it. Even if you refuse me, even if you tell me to leave and never come back, I will spend every remaining day knowing that somewhere is a 5-year-old boy with violet eyes who saved his father's life, and that father wasn't worthy of the gift." Seraphine looked down at Lucian. "What do you think, little light? Should we give him a chance?" Lucian bit his lip, thinking. "He's very sad, like when I found that baby bird that fell from its nest. It was hurt and scared." "And what did you do with the baby bird?" "I helped it, because that's what you're supposed to do when things are hurt. You help them get better." He looked at Draven. "Is he going to get better?" Seraphine's eyes filled with fresh tears. Her son saw the broken king as something to be healed. "I don't know, baby. That depends on him." She looked at Draven. "There will be rules, conditions. First, I am not your property. I will have my own chambers. If I choose to share your bed again, it will be my choice. Second, Lucian's upbringing will be my domain. You can be involved, but I make the final decisions. Third, you will tell the court the truth, all of it. You will admit you banished us, that you were warned, that you were wrong. Fourth, if you ever reject him again, I will take him and disappear, and you will never find us. Finally, you will give us time, real time. We do this at our pace, not yours." "Agreed," Draven said to each condition. "Every day, for the rest of my life, however long it takes." Seraphine took a deep breath, then nodded. "We'll come. We'll try. But Draven, if you break his heart, I will break you. Mother's promise." "I won't," Draven said, the vow resonating with power. "I won't break his heart. Or yours. Not ever again." She placed a hand on his shoulder, hesitant. "Then get up. You look ridiculous kneeling in the dirt." He stood slowly, then spoke directly to his son. "I promise you, I will spend every day being the father you deserve. I don't know how yet, but I will learn, and I will never stop trying." Lucian held up his hand. "Mama says promises are important. You have to shake on them." Draven stared at the small, offered hand. He knelt again and took his son's hand in his own. The size difference was staggering. The touch sent a jolt through him. "I promise," he said, voice steady now, strong. "I shake on it." Lucian smiled, bright and uncomplicated. "Okay, can we go home now? I'm hungry." The simple request made Seraphine laugh, a sound that seemed to surprise her. It was the first sound of joy he'd heard from her in 5 years. "Yes, little light, we can go home." Home. The word had never sounded so terrifying or so full of promise. "The Citadel is a 3-day ride," Draven said, "but I want to arrive in daylight. I want everyone to see you both as we enter. No shadows, no hiding. I want the world to know you're home." The return journey was a revelation. Draven learned that Lucian was fascinated by insects and would spend long minutes watching ants. He discovered his son had inherited Seraphine's artistic talent and loved to draw. He heard Lucian's laughter for the first time when a butterfly landed on his nose. On the second night, Lucian fell asleep against Draven's side. It happened naturally. The boy drifted off, his small body warm and trusting. Draven froze, afraid to move, terrified of disturbing this precious moment. Seraphine watched from across the fire. "He doesn't usually trust strangers," she said quietly. "I'm honored," Draven said. and meant it with every fiber of his being. They arrived at the citadel just before noon on the third day, the sun high in the sky. Draven had kept his word. They would enter in daylight, when vampires were at their weakest. Let his court see him weakened. Let them see what mattered more than strength. The gates loomed before them. Draven dismounted and lifted Lucian down. Together, the three of them walked toward the gates on foot. No carriages, no ceremony. Just a family coming home. The gates opened. The courtyard beyond was packed. The entire court had gathered. Nobles, servants, guards, all staring in stunned shock. They saw their king, returned from assumed death. They saw the woman who had vanished 5 years ago. And they saw the child. The whispers started immediately. Half-breed, abomination, impossible. But Lucian, overwhelmed by the crowd, had instinctively called on his magic for comfort. A soft golden light surrounded him, warm and gentle, making him glow like a small sun in the dark courtyard. The assembled vampires shrank back, not in pain, but in disbelief. Draven walked forward with Seraphine on one side and Lucian on the other. When they reached the center, he stopped and turned to face his court. His voice carried to every corner. I stand before you today to correct a grave injustice and to speak a truth that should have been proclaimed 5 years ago. This woman is Seraphine Vesper, my mate and your queen. 5 years ago she gave birth to my son, and his voice didn't falter. I rejected them both. I called my own son insufficient. I deemed his mixed blood a weakness. And I banished them from this court and from my life. The gasps and murmurs rose, but he spoke over them. I was wrong. 3 words, simple, devastating, absolute. I was blinded by pride, by fear, by an adherence to doctrine I valued more than family. But here is the truth you must know. I was warned. Lord Valerius warned me at my wedding that a vampire-human union might produce a child of mixed blood. The maesters warned me during the pregnancy, and I dismissed them all in my arrogance. I chose to marry Seraphine knowing the risk. I chose to have a child knowing what might result. And when Lucian was born exactly as they said he might be, I punished him for the consequences of my own gamble. I made them both pay the price for my hubris. He let that settle. Their king, admitting not just error, but culpability. My son. He placed a hand on Lucian's shoulder, and the boy looked up at him with those violet eyes. Crown Prince Lucian Draven Vesper is not a weakness. He is a miracle. He possesses a power our bloodline has never known. A magic that bridges the divide between our world and the mortal realm. A magic that saved my life when my own pure blood failed me. He let them absorb the implications. Their king, saved by the half-human child he'd scorned. From this moment forward, Lucian is my heir, my only heir. He will be afforded every respect, every privilege, every protection due to the Crown Prince, and anyone who questions his right to that title will answer to me personally. As for Queen Seraphine, she has shown me mercy I do not deserve. She has given me a chance to atone for my failures. I will spend the rest of my existence trying to be worthy of that gift. This court will honor her as she should have been honored from the beginning. Any disrespect shown to her will be considered a personal offense against the crown. Am I understood? The silence was heavy. Then, slowly, Lord Valerius stepped forward. The old vampire looked at Draven, then at Lucian, then back. For a moment, Draven thought he would challenge. But Valerius knelt, his ancient knees hitting stone with an audible crack. Your Majesty, he said. Then he turned to Lucian. Your Highness. Crown Prince Lucian, I welcome you home. It was capitulation. The most powerful elder, who had argued most for bloodline purity, was publicly acknowledging Draven's half-human son as heir. The rest of the court, seeing Valerius kneel, followed suit. Like dominoes, they dropped to their knees. Nobles, servants, guards, all knelt before their king, their queen, and their prince. Lucian, overwhelmed, looked up at his mother with wide, frightened eyes. "Mama?" Seraphine knelt beside him. "It's okay, little light. They're just showing respect. You don't have to be afraid." "But there are so many." "I know, but you're not alone. Your father and I are right here. We'll always be right here." The phrase, "your father," was deliberate. The first time she'd referred to Draven that way in Lucian's hearing. The boy looked up at Draven, expression uncertain. Draven knelt too, heedless of the watching crowd, bringing himself to his son's level. "Your mother is right. This is overwhelming. And if it's too much, if you want to go inside and away from all these people, we can do that." "But they're all looking at me." "Yes, they are. Because you're important. You're a prince. But more importantly, you're my son. And they're looking at you because they're seeing something they've never seen before. Someone who is both vampire and human, both shadow and light. You're unique, Lucian. And that makes some people nervous. But it also makes you extraordinary." Lucian seemed to absorb this. "Like my magic?" "Exactly like your magic. Do you remember when you healed me? That was your gift, a wonderful, special gift that no one else in this entire palace has. And these people need to understand that your differences aren't a weakness. They're your strength." The boy seemed reassured. "Okay, can we see the library now? The one with 3 stories?" Draven felt something in his chest loosen, and he laughed, a genuine warm sound that startled the kneeling court. Yes, we can see the library. But first, let's get you and your mother settled in your rooms." He stood, offering his hand. After a moment's hesitation, the boy took it. That simple gesture, his son's small hand in his own, was witnessed by the entire court. It was a statement more powerful than any decree. Draven turned to his kneeling court. "You are dismissed. The Queen and Prince require time to settle. We will convene formal court in 3 days." They rose and dispersed, whispers starting. But Draven didn't care. He had more important concerns. He led his family into the palace. The Queen's chambers had been transformed. The stale tomb had been aired, cleaned, filled with life. Fresh roses filled vases. Heavy curtains replaced with lighter fabrics. A fire burned in the hearth. Through the connecting door, Lucian's new room was visible. Shelves lined with books, a large window with specially treated glass, toys, art supplies, a comfortable bed, everything a child could want. Lucian's eyes went wide. "All of this is mine?" "All of it," Draven confirmed. "And if there's anything else you want, you just have to ask." Lucian ran to the bookshelves. "Can I read them all?" "Every single one. And when you finish those, we'll get more." Seraphine stood in the doorway between the rooms, arms wrapped around herself. She was looking around with an expression Draven couldn't quite read. He approached carefully, stopping a respectful distance away. "If there's anything you want changed, anything at all, just tell me." She turned to look at him, eyes bright with unshed tears. "You remembered," she said, gesturing to the roses. "I didn't think you would." "I remember everything," Draven said softly. "Every conversation, every moment, every detail. I've spent 5 years trying to forget, and I couldn't." She looked away, blinking back tears. Don't say things like that. Not yet. I can't. I know. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to push. I just wanted you to know." He stopped, changed tack. "You must be exhausted. The journey was long. I'll leave you both to rest." He started to turn, but her voice stopped him. "Draven." He looked back. She was studying him with guarded curiosity. "What you did today, in the courtyard. Admitting your mistake in front of the entire court. Admitting you were warned and chose wrong anyway. That couldn't have been easy." "It was the easiest thing I've ever done," he said honestly. "Because it was the truth, and I'm tired of lies. They'll use it against you, your enemies. They'll see it as weakness. Let them. I've spent 5 centuries being strong, being unyielding, being feared, And what did it get me? An empty palace and a broken heart. If admitting I was wrong, if loving my family openly is weakness, then I'll be weak, gladly. Something shifted in her expression. Not forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps the first crack in the armor. I need time, she said quietly. I know. Take all you need. And I need to see that this is real, that it lasts. I won't change back, but I understand why you can't trust that yet. I'll prove it, however long it takes. That night, he sat alone in his chambers, staring at the connecting door to Seraphine's rooms. It was closed, locked perhaps. It felt like a physical barrier around his heart. But it was a barrier he had earned, one he would have to dismantle brick by brick through action, not words. He thought about the long road ahead, about earning his son's love, about rebuilding trust with Seraphine. It was daunting, overwhelming, impossible perhaps. But for the first time in 5 years, Draven felt something he'd thought lost forever. Hope. The following weeks were a study in quiet, relentless devotion. Draven's transformation demonstrated through 1,000 small, deliberate actions. Every morning he went to Lucian's chambers. He dismissed the nursemaids and tutors who descended. I will do it. I've already missed 5 years. I won't miss another moment. And he did. He was there when Lucian woke from nightmares. He helped him dress. He taught him his letters using ancient manuscripts from the library, his deep voice patient. He learned his son's rhythms, his preferences, his fears and delights. He discovered Lucian was terrified of thunderstorms. During the first one, he found the boy huddled in a corner, hands over ears. Draven sat beside him, pulled Lucian into his lap despite initial stiffness. It's just the sky making noise. The thunder can't hurt you. Your mother and I are here. Gradually, Lucian relaxed, uncurling. By the time the storm passed, he had fallen asleep against Draven's chest, and Draven sat there for hours, unwilling to move. He discovered Lucian loved wild strawberries and had them brought fresh weekly. He learned his son was fascinated by insects. Draven, the king who commanded armies, would sit in the palace gardens in the dirt, watching ants with his son. See, Papa? That one is carrying a leaf. She's a worker. They all help each other. That's what families do too. Papa. The word had slipped out so naturally Lucian hadn't even noticed. But Draven had. It hit him like a physical blow. His son had called him Papa. He had to turn away, overwhelmed. When he looked back, his eyes were suspiciously bright. That's right. That's what families do. One evening, Draven found them in the observatory at the tower's top. He had the space opened and cleaned, the brass telescope polished. Lucian was fascinated by seeing stars up close. Now he had the boy perched on his hip, pointing out constellations. And that one is the Dragon's Tooth. Your ancestors believed that the souls of great warriors went there when they passed. They said if you looked closely, you could see them fighting still, protecting the realm even in death. Are the stars hot? Lucian asked. Some are, incredibly so, burning with fire that would turn this entire palace to ash. Others are cold, long dead, their light just a memory traveling across the darkness to reach us, like a message from a long time ago. He caught Seraphine's eye over Lucian's head. She had been watching from the doorway. The look he gave her was filled with the sorrow of their own lost time, the years his message of love had failed to travel. She held his gaze for a long moment, and something passed between them. Not forgiveness, not yet, but an acknowledgement, a recognition that he was trying. She gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. It was fragile, tentative. But it was something. Her own healing was slower, more guarded. The palace was a landscape of ghosts for her. He could see shadows pass over her face when she walked certain corridors. He understood. He gave her space, but his presence was a constant, steady warmth at the edge of her world. He would leave a single, perfect rose on her pillow, the kind from the southern coast she had once mentioned she loved. He had the kitchens prepare human foods she missed, fresh baked bread and honey cakes. He made attempts to bridge the physical distance, small, tentative gestures. One night, As they stood on a balcony overlooking the city, he reached out, his fingers hovering just inches from her arm. He didn't touch her. He just waited, giving her the choice. For a long moment, she remained still, frozen. Then, slowly, she uncrossed her arms and let her hand brush against his. His fingers closed around hers, touch gentle, reverent. They stood like that for a long time in silence as the moon traced its path. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. The breakthrough came one rainy afternoon in the library. Draven was reading a history of the kingdom to Lucian. Lucian, growing restless, slipped off his lap and was exploring the towering shelves. He reached for a heavy tome on a high shelf and it wobbled, threatening to fall. Before Draven could move, Lucian's eyes glowed with that soft amethyst light. The heavy book levitated, floating gently down into his waiting hands. He beamed, turning to his father with pure pride. "I did it!" Draven didn't react with shock or awe. His response was far more profound. He smiled, wide and unguarded. "You did. You are amazing, Lucian." He crossed the room and knelt before his son. He reached out and ruffled the boy's dark hair, a gesture of casual, uncomplicated affection. In that moment, Lucian did something that changed everything. He launched himself forward, wrapping his small arms around Draven's neck in a fierce, clumsy hug. "I love you, Papa," he mumbled into the velvet of his father's tunic. Draven froze, his entire being suffused with a joy so intense it was painful. He wrapped his own arms around his son, holding him tight, burying his face in the boy's hair, which smelled of old paper and rain. He couldn't speak, he could only hold on. Seraphine, who had been watching from the doorway, felt the final wall of ice around her heart crack. She saw not a king, not a monster, but a father holding his son. A father who had clawed his way back from darkness to find the light. She walked into the room and knelt beside them, placing her hand on both their backs, completing the circle. The family, broken and scattered, was finally, tentatively, whole again. The change in Draven resonated beyond the palace walls. Where once he had ruled through fear, he now began to govern with a wisdom born of humility. His son was a living bridge between two worlds, and Draven began to see the value in that bridge. During one council meeting, Lord Valerius broached the subject. "My king, the Strigoi lords have sent an envoy. They inquire about the succession. They have heard rumors of the prince's unique heritage." The subtext was obvious. Your enemies perceive weakness. The old Draven would have responded with a cold threat. The new Draven leaned back. Seraphine sat in a newly installed, equally ornate chair beside him, a public declaration that scandalized the court. Lucian was not present. They shielded him from politics. "And what is your counsel, Valerius?" "We must control the narrative. Emphasize the boy's vampiric lineage, his strength. Frame his other side as minor, inconsequential." Draven looked at Seraphine. She met his gaze, and a silent conversation passed between them. He saw her strength, her quiet defiance, and it bolstered his own. "No," he said, the word simple but absolute. "We will do the opposite. We will tell them the truth. We will tell them that the crown prince is the son of a vampire king and a human queen, that he wields a power born of both night and day, that his strength is not in the purity of his blood, but in its union. We will tell them that our future is not in isolation, but in connection. Let them see it as weakness. Their mistake will be their undoing." It was radical, terrifying, but delivered with such conviction, the council was silenced. He proved it in the weeks that followed. For the first time in centuries, the Vesperine court opened tentative diplomatic channels with the human baronies on its borders. Draven, accompanied by Seraphine, met with human lords. He did not come as a conqueror. He came as an equal, speaking of shared interests, of trade and mutual protection. Seraphine was an invaluable ambassador, smoothing over centuries of mistrust. They were building bridges, stone by painful stone. Draven's new perspective was most evident in his interactions with Lucian's magic. He no longer saw it as a mere tool, but as an expression of his son's unique soul. He sought out ancient texts on life magic, on mortal philosophies. One afternoon, he found Lucian in the royal gardens, sitting cross-legged. A small, injured bird lay cupped in the boy's hands. A soft, golden light enveloped it. Lucian was humming, brow furrowed in concentration. After a few moments, the bird stirred, chirped weakly, then fluttered from his hands, flying unsteadily to a branch. Lucian looked up, face glowing with quiet joy. Draven, who had watched from a distance, felt profound awe. His ancestors had built an empire on the power to take life. His son, his heir, possessed the power to restore it. He walked over and sat on the grass beside him. That was a beautiful thing to do, Lucian. He hurt his wing. I know. Your power, the light, it comes from life, from the sun, from your mother's side. It is a gift. Never let anyone tell you it is a weakness. Some of the guards look at me funny. Draven's jaw tightened. They are afraid of what they do not understand. But they will learn. We will teach them. Strength is not just about swords and shadows, Lucian. True strength is about the courage to protect what you love. It's about building things, not just breaking them. He was not just teaching his son. He was defining his own new reign. Months bled into a year. The new rhythm of their lives settled into a quiet, sturdy cadence. The citadel was transformed. The oppressive silence was gone, replaced by the sound of a child's occasional laughter. The court had adapted. The open presence of the human queen and the undeniable power of the hybrid prince were no longer scandal, but accepted facts. The scars, however, remained. They were not ugly wounds anymore, but faint, silvery lines, reminders of the pain that had preceded peace. Seraphine, though she now shared Draven's bed and his counsel, would sometimes fall quiet, a shadow passing over her eyes as a memory surfaced. In those moments, Draven would not try to fill the silence. He would simply reach for her hand, his touch a steady, patient anchor, waiting for her to return. He understood that her forgiveness was not a destination, but a journey they would walk together for the rest of their shared eternity. His relationship with Lucian was the undisputed center of his world. The awe had not faded, but it was now mingled with comfortable, everyday love. He learned the topography of his son's imagination, the names of his imaginary friends, the complex rules of invented games. He discovered Lucian had Seraphine's artistic talent and would spend hours with him in the scriptorium, providing enchanted inks that shimmered with captured starlight as the boy drew fantastic beasts and swirling galaxies. One evening, as winter again began to dust the mountain peaks, Draven found Seraphine and Lucian curled together in a great armchair by the library fire. It was a mirror of 1,000 nights, but everything about it was different. Lucian was no longer a babe, but a growing boy, his head resting on his mother's lap. And Draven was not an outsider, but a welcome presence. He walked over and settled on the hearthrug at their feet, leaning his head back against the chair, a gesture of profound, peaceful contentment. Lucian reached down and threaded his small fingers into his father's dark hair. "Papa?" "Yes, my son?" "The bad men who hurt you, will they come back?" The question was a stark reminder of the world outside their fragile peace. Draven's expression hardened for a moment. He had investigated the ambush. It had been orchestrated by a faction of the Strigoi, a test of his strength. They had not anticipated Lucian. They were quiet now, watching, waiting. The threat was not gone. "If they do," Draven said, voice a low, dangerous rumble, "they will find me waiting." He then softened his tone, turning his head to look up at his son. "But you do not need to worry about them. Your mother and I will keep you safe. That is our promise." Seraphine stroked Lucian's hair, her gaze meeting Draven's over the boy's head. In her eyes, he saw not fear or bitterness, but a shared resolve. They were partners now, in all things. "Your father is the strongest king in the world," she said softly. "And you, my love, have a light inside you that no darkness can ever extinguish." Lucian, reassured, closed his eyes, breathing soon deepening into sleep. Draven watched his son, his heart swelling with a love so vast it felt as if it could hold the entire sky. He remembered the cold, ambitious vampire he had been, the one who saw this child as a flaw, a political liability. That man was a stranger to him now, a ghost from a different lifetime. He had believed power was about being unbreachable, pure, absolute. He knew now that true power was this: the warmth of his son's hand in his hair, the trust in his wife's eyes, the terrifying, beautiful vulnerability of loving someone more than his own immortal life. He reached up and gently took Seraphine's hand, lacing his fingers through hers. He brought her knuckles to his lips, his touch a silent vow. The 5 years he had lost were a debt he could never repay, a wound that would never completely vanish. But the years ahead stretched before them, an eternity not of empty rule, but of shared sunrises, of stories read by the fire, of watching their miraculous son grow into the king he was born to be. He looked from his sleeping child to his wife, his queen, the woman who had survived his cruelty and had found the grace to teach him how to be human. The journey was far from over. There were still kingdoms to rule, enemies to watch, and a boy to raise. But here, in the warm glow of the firelight, surrounded by the two halves of his soul, Draven, the king who had been broken and remade, was finally, truly, home.